And take a few more moments to remember the motivation you started with earlier today and regenerate that intention to make everything you do beneficial, meaningful to yourself, to others, to the world, and for it to be a cause for enlightenment, becoming fully enlightened, to be able to help all beings to the best of your ability. So, some time ago, Venerable Children asked if I would give a talk during this course, the EML, and I said, sure, just let me know when. And so it's happening now. And I want to apologize, I haven't been participating in the other activities of this course, talks and so forth, but I had some other work that I needed to work on, still working on. So. But I'm happy to have the chance to give this talk today and share with you some things that I've learned and found beneficial, and maybe have some interaction at the end. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer. So I thought to talk about ethics in general, ethical conduct, and in a text by Lama Tsongkhapa, the Lamrim Chenmo, the great exposition of the stages of the path. He has a very nice whole chapter about ethics, in which I found some very, very nice material for myself. So I thought to use some of that material here in this talk. And when I was preparing for the talk, I became aware that I actually have ambivalence about this topic. The word ethics or morality, some translators and teachers use the word morality. When I hear that word or read that word or think about that word, it kind of, there's this little feeling of kind of resistance coming up. So I thought, that's interesting. And I explored that, and I think it might have to do with the earlier part of my life, because I was raised in a Catholic family. My father was quite strict Catholic, but also strict with his family. You know, he made rules and expected us to obey without question. And if we didn't, he could get quite angry. So it was rather strict in my family. But also I went to Catholic schools for 12 years, and there things were also quite strict. And so I think the word ethics and morality can be associated with rules, strict rules, discipline, punishment if you're not, if you don't follow the rules, and so forth. So it might be, this feeling of resistance might be left over from that. But then I went through years of rebelliousness in my teen years. I became very rebellious against my family, against the Catholic Church, against the country, the government, and so on. So I had that whole story, that whole kind of experience, being rebellious, and then being a hippie, where you kind of, reject rules, reject norms. Although I have to say, I wasn't really naughty. I don't think I did any really bad things. I did try to behave myself, but I think it was more because of fear rather than genuine respect. So I was afraid of the consequences if I broke the rules, if I went against the norms that were expected of me, being punished, having people angry at me, being shamed, and so forth. So fear kept me from acting unethically. It wasn't so much out of respect. So internally there was this, kind of pushback attitude. But externally I was trying to behave myself. But then when I encountered Buddhism, somehow I think ethics became something quite important and attractive to me. Because I remember after I got ordained, I started learning Buddhism in India, in Dharamsala, the Tibetan library, and I was there for a while, and then I went to Nepal and I stayed at Kopan Monastery, and I was there for about 3 years. So I feel very fortunate that the first couple of years of my life, first couple of years of my ordained life, I was living in a monastery, which was relatively supportive of monastic life. And we had a Sangha community there of Westerners. It would vary between 10, 15, 20 people. And we had a daily schedule. We would get up, similar to here, we'd get up in the morning and do prayers for a while and then have breakfast. And then after breakfast, everybody had some job to do. We didn't call it offering service, which is a nice term, but we just called it a job. But I had a nice job. My job was to transcribe teachings. So that was really nice. I could sit at a desk and I could listen to the teachings of Lama, so mostly Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, listen to them again and type them into a typewriter. So that was a nice job. And then we would have lunch. Before lunch, we'd have prayers. After lunch, we'd have prayers. Then I can't remember what we did in the afternoon. Tried to stay awake. Maybe more work. And then in the evening, we'd have some teachings and discussion and so on. So it was a good, environment for the first few years of ordained life. But Lama Yeshe, who was the spiritual director of Kopan Monastery, instituted what he called public exams. And every Sangha member, every monastic was required to give a talk publicly. Everybody could come. I mean, not like a huge number of people, but all the other monastics and anybody else who happened to be at Kopan at the time. So sometimes there could be 30, 40, 50 people. But the scary thing was the lamas were there too. So you had to give a talk with your teacher sitting there in front of you, That was pretty nerve-wracking. And I was always shy by nature anyway, so it was really difficult. But at least we got to choose the topic, and we got to prepare for it. And I remember I chose the topic of ethics. And I don't remember why I chose that topic, but there must have been something that I found attractive and interesting to want to talk about this topic. So that's why I say I have ambivalent feelings. There's a feeling of kind of some resistance there, but there's also attraction there, attracted to this topic. And anyway, I'm always happy to talk about it and share with others. And I think one of the things I was really attracted to when I did start to learn Buddhism was the emphasis on compassion. I mean, all religions and spiritual traditions talk about compassion, but Buddhism is special in that we are advised to have compassion for all living beings, not just human beings. And people actually practice, well, maybe not everybody, but I observed that with the Tibetans when I first started learning Buddhism, that they, for example, picking up insects off the ground and putting them in a safe place so they wouldn't get squished or stepped on. So I found that really beautiful, this respect for all life, all living beings, even little insects, and the non-harming of insects. And that's actually the meaning of ethics. The essential meaning of ethics is non-harming. Living your life in such a way that you refrain from harming other beings, big, small, human, non-human, everyone, every living being, as much as possible. Of course, it's difficult to do that perfectly, but at least to have that awareness and to try to avoid harming others. So that could, I mean, that was something that was always important to me anyway, even before I met Buddhism. I really loved animals and was kind of horrified by the way some people would treat animals, killing them for their meat and their fur, torturing them in laboratory experiments and so forth. So that was one thing that I really liked when I met Buddhism, this importance of respect for all living beings. And that's really what ethics is all about, the kind of bottom line, the essential meaning of ethics. So as I said, there's a lot of nice material on this topic in the Lamrim Chenmo, the English translation, which is in 3 volumes. So in volume 1, chapter 24, talks about the higher training of ethics, which is the practice of ethics for the attainment of liberation, freeing ourselves from samsara. And then, of course, in the Bodhisattva path, we also practice ethics, not just to free ourselves from suffering and attain nirvana, but to attain full enlightenment, Buddhahood, to be able to help all living beings. So, anyway, I've made this slideshow. It's kind of helpful to have some material up there on the screen to focus on. And so one of the things that's beneficial in the practice of ethics is to be aware of the benefits of ethical conduct. This is often a theme at least in the Tibetan tradition. I don't know about other traditions, but they talk about the benefits of something, doing something, and the disadvantages of not doing it. So that's quite helpful psychologically. If you do it, you get these good results, and if you don't do it, you'll get some bad results. So there are many benefits of ethics, but I'll just mention a few here. So many quotations, both from the sutras and the Indian commentaries, say that it's the foundation of all good qualities, and they compare it to the earth. The earth is the foundation, the basis for all of life, all animate beings, sentient beings, but also everything else, all the things in nature, trees and plants and mountains, and also the things that we build, houses and buildings, and so forth. So all of these are based on the earth. Without the earth, we wouldn't have any of these things. So in a similar way, ethics is the foundation of many good things on the path, the good qualities that we can develop, and so on. And then the second bullet point says, keeping one precept for one day now, meaning in this period of time, which is sometimes called the degenerate age, is more meritorious than making extensive offerings to millions of Buddhas for millions of eons at other times, which are more conducive for spiritual practice. So this was said by the Buddha in a sutra called the King of Concentration Sutra, the Samadhi Raja Sutra. So he said, if you make lots and lots of beautiful, wonderful, fantastic offerings to millions of Buddhas over millions of eons, I mean, that's a lot of merit, of course, but at this day and age, when things are so degenerate, so difficult to practice, keeping just one precept for one day and night, creates even more merit than that. You've probably heard that before. Have you heard that before? Yeah. So that's encouraging. And most of us are trying to keep more than one precept. Some of us have hundreds of precepts. So all the more merit. And then it's also the cause of fortunate rebirths, if we want to make sure that in our future lives we will be born in good conditions and not in the lower realms, but in a fortunate realm, and then have the good conditions, especially to be able to continue practicing the Dharma, meet with teachers, and have conducive environments in which to practice, friends, spiritual friends with whom to practice, and so forth. So all of that, the results come about on the basis of ethics. It's the main cause of a human birth, precious human birth. And then it's also the basis of all other practices, such as calm abiding and developing the wisdoms, realizing permanence, realizing selflessness, realizing emptiness, and so on. So all practices are based on good ethics. And then, of course, the realizations that we strive to achieve and the attainments, bodhisattvas, grounds, and all the way up to Buddhahood. So without ethics, these are not possible. And then another benefit is by keeping precepts, we uphold the Buddha's teachings. So Venerable Chuni spoke about that very beautifully the other day in her BBC about the river of nuns. Yeah, I like that. It's beautiful. There's been not just nuns, also monks. But there's been this continuous stream of people taking monastic vows, keeping monastic vows, passing them on to the next generation, right from the time of the Buddha. I think it might be the oldest monastic tradition in the world, isn't it? And it's still going. It didn't die out. More than, 2,600 years now, I think. It's been going. So we're part of that. And that's an essential ingredient or element for Buddha's teachings to survive in the world, to continue in the world, continue to benefit sentient beings. So keeping precepts makes us a part of that, an essential part of upholding the Buddha's teachings. So these are some of the benefits. I'm sure you've heard others, but it's good to be aware of these, think of these, to keep alive our wish to keep precepts, whether you're ordained or not, because precepts isn't just for ordained people, but also lay followers keep like the 5 vows, 5 precepts of lay people, and then there's bodhisattva vows and so on. So we all have the opportunity to keep precepts. So these are the benefits, and then there's disadvantages to not having good ethical conduct. We won't get these benefits, and instead we may get the opposite. If we don't have good ethical conduct, then our negative qualities, our disturbing emotions and so on may increase. We may create the cause for unfortunate rebirths in the future lives and suffering, and keeping ourselves longer in samsara, cyclic existence, rather than going in the direction of liberation and enlightenment. But fortunately, even if we do have transgressions of our precepts, of our ethics, it's not like something carved in stone that is unchangeable. We can do the practice of purification to clear up those mistakes. They say there's nothing that's so bad, so negative, that it cannot be purified. Even Angulimala, you may have heard of Angulimala, who killed 999 people and was about to kill his 1,000th victim. And then he met the Buddha, and his mind changed. And in that same lifetime, he became an arhat. He attained nirvana. So he was able to get beyond all that negative karma. That's pretty heavy, right? So so we can purify. I'm sure none of us have done anything that bad, so we can for sure purify whatever mistakes we make. And then also in this section of the Lamrim Chenmo on higher training of ethics, it mentions what are called 4 doors to losing ethical conduct, 4 causes by which we might break precepts or have other stains or mistakes in our ethical conduct. So it's good to be aware of these and then remedy them if they do happen. Best to try to avoid them in the first place, but then if they do happen, there are remedies to them. So the first is ignorance, in the sense of not knowing what is correct ethical conduct and what is not. So not knowing our precepts. People do sometimes take precepts and then don't really, either they don't have the interest or they don't have the opportunity to really get teachings on their precepts and know what their precepts are. And not just in the sense of a list of the precepts, but what it means to keep them. What do you have to do to keep them, and how they can be broken. Yeah, so if you don't have that knowledge, that understanding, then you might unknowingly break your precepts. And just as an example of this, I don't know if anyone else has talked to you about this, but there were a couple of Western monastics who took the Getzel vows, the Shramanera vows, and they thought that in order to break the vow of celibacy, sexual, it's not just sexual misconduct, but sexual activity, to break that vow, you had to have orgasm. You actually had to go all the way to orgasm. That's what they thought. And so they thought, well, it's okay to have a certain amount of sexual activity as long as I don't have an orgasm. So they would do that. They were actually doing that. They were getting involved in sexual activity and then stopping before orgasm. And they thought that was okay until their teacher found out. And then their teachers, these were several different people with different teachers, their teachers told them, no, that's not okay, and you've actually broken your vows. So then they had to disrobe. And it's kind of understandable that they made that mistake, because some of the books or pamphlets in which the vows were explained actually said that. Like there are these 4 different factors in the breaking of a vow. There's the object, the motivation, the action itself, and then the completion. And in these books, for the completion, it did actually say orgasm. Okay, so there was a basis for this misunderstanding. But the problem was the translation, because the Tibetan term there was dewa, which it can mean bliss, as in tantric bliss. In the tantric teachings, they talk about bliss and emptiness and so on. So it could mean bliss, but it can also mean just pleasure. It's the same word as in the different kinds of feelings. We have a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, and a neutral feeling. So just a pleasant feeling. And that's actually the meaning there. The breakage of that vow happens as soon as you have a pleasant feeling upon contact of whatever bodily organs are being used. So it doesn't have to be orgasm at all. It's just a feeling of pleasure. So unfortunately, these translations of the vows were misleading, were inaccurate, and led to a few people losing their vows. But that's just an example of how it can happen, that because of not knowing properly what constitutes keeping the vows, what constitutes breaking the vows, people can sometimes unknowingly break their vows. So it's really important, and it's wonderful that there are courses like this to be able to learn what the vows are, and monasteries, of course, in which that kind of information is available and people are living correctly, abiding correctly in the vows. Because that's another problem too. I didn't attend the Sakyadhita conference, but some of the nuns here did, and they brought back a book with all the papers in it. And there was one paper presented by a Bhutanese nun, and she got a PhD, and her research involved sexual abuse in monasteries. And one of the things she found in Bhutan, and it's probably quite similar in other Himalayan monasteries is that monks will sometimes coerce nuns into having sex with them in the name of Tantra. You know, like, please be my consort and it will be beneficial for you and beneficial for me. We'll get enlightened quickly. And these nuns are often young and uneducated. Again, they don't know. They haven't received proper training and education in their vows. And so they think, okay, that sounds good. And so it's actually not correct for people wearing robes to engage in sexual activity, you know, even in the name of Tantra. So, so these are some like extreme examples of what can happen if you're ignorant of the precepts and what's involved in them and so on. So the antidote, the remedy to this, is to learn to attend teachings, courses, read books, study, and really make yourself aware of your precepts, how they're kept, how they are broken, and then how to purify them. So if you do, you know, in some cases, breaking precepts doesn't mean you have to disrobe and leave, but there are things you can do to purify, such as doing posada, as we do here every 2 weeks. Okay, the second of the 4 doors is carelessness, lack of conscientiousness. I spelled that wrong. Should be a C in there. Anyway, so this is when our mind is not calm and clear, but like a wild elephant, or like a wild horse, or like a monkey, you know, just completely out of control. And if our mind is out of control, then it's easy for our body and our speech, our actions to be out of control. And this can lead to breaking vows or precepts. So there's 4 remedies to this problem. One is mindfulness. And mindfulness here doesn't mean, as in the popular context, of just being in the present moment, just being aware of what's happening each moment, but it means not forgetting your practice, not forgetting your precepts, keeping those in mind, remembering that you are an ordained person or a lay person and you have precepts. You have taken these precepts to not kill, to not steal, and so forth. So we need to maintain awareness, memory, non-forgetfulness of those. And that's another benefit of doing the posada every 2 weeks, going through the precepts, reading through them, so that we don't forget what we have promised to do and not do. And the second is alertness, which is, it's probably another translation for, what does Venerable call it? Vigilance, or just introspective awareness. There's different translations for this, but it's compared to the spy or the guard that watches what's going on and looks out for trouble, looks out for the possibility of going in the direction of breaking a precept. So watching our thoughts, watching our actions, watching our speech, to see if we are acting in accordance with our precepts, or we're going off in a different direction, going astray. And then the last 2 are these 2 mental factors that are really, really important. Integrity, which is sometimes translated as sense of shame. In some books they use that translation, but that's a little controversial. It doesn't sound so positive. So I really like integrity, the term Venerable uses. So this is the mental factor in which we refrain from non-virtuous or harmful behavior out of a sense of personal integrity. Just like, for example, I'm a nun, or I'm a monk, or I'm a Buddhist, and it just wouldn't be proper to do that kind of action. Okay, so not necessarily thinking about others, but just thinking about ourselves, our own sense of integrity. And especially if we have taken precepts, we take precepts like we make a promise to the Buddha, I'm not going to do this. And then if we go against that, it's not proper. It just doesn't feel right. And the second one, the last on the list, is consideration for others. And that's the mental factor in which we refrain from non-virtuous or harmful behavior out of consideration for others, thinking about how this would affect others, how it would be harmful to them, or how they would be upset with us, disturbed by what we do, maybe even lose faith in the Buddha, the three jewels, and so on. So thinking in terms of others, and that can stop us from breaking precepts or misbehaving in other ways. So these are actually 4 different mental factors: mindfulness, alertness, integrity, and consideration for others. That are, we do have them already. They're already natural parts of our mind, but we need to develop them, develop those muscles, and make sure that they're strong and working for us to help us keep our precepts. The third door is lack of respect for the Buddha, his teachings, your own teachers and spiritual friends, your precepts. So this is something we need to be on the lookout for. Just look at our mind, and one cause for a lack of respect could be arrogance, sense of arrogance. I am superior, I know everything, I know more than they do, or whatever, this kind of attitude. I was reading something the other day about how when we're beginners, we're just starting off learning about Buddhism, learning about the Dharma, then there's not much chance of arrogance coming up because we just don't know much. But the more we know, the more we learn, the more our knowledge builds, then our head can get quite big. So then there's more danger of arrogance coming up. And I remember also when I was doing the master's program, our teacher would often talk to us about that. Be careful. You get all this knowledge, you do all these studies, you can easily become proud. And it's true. Even if you don't want it to happen. Anyway, my case, I can see it happening, however much I try to avoid it. So we have to look out for that, look out for arrogance. And I find a couple of things that are really helpful to avoid arrogance or to overcome arrogance is to remember our faults, remember what we don't know. Instead of comparing ourselves with those who know less than we do, compare ourselves with His Holiness the Dalai Lama or with Buddha, with our teachers who know so much more than we do. So if we compare ourselves with them, then it's clear we don't have much to be arrogant about. And also how we still have many delusions, many faults, we make mistakes, and so on. It's not to put ourselves down, not to develop hatred and negativity towards ourselves, but just to bring ourselves down from an inflated sense of importance and superiority. Have a more balanced feel. Yeah, I may know a lot and I have good qualities and I've done a lot, but I'm still a lot to learn, a long way to go. Another thing that helps with arrogance is just to recall that whatever we do know, whatever good qualities we do have, we are dependent on others. The kindness of others, the kindness of my teachers in teaching me all these things, the kindness of my parents in bringing me into this world and keeping me alive all those years so that I could eventually meet Buddha's teachings and practice them. The kindness of all the people who provide us with food every day and so on and so forth. So focusing on others and how we are dependent on them, how they are kind to us, is also really helpful. It's humbling. And then here the remedy for this lack of respect is contemplating the good qualities of these objects, the Buddha, the Dharma, his teachings, your teachers, spiritual friends, your precepts. So focus on the good qualities, the good aspects of them. It's really helpful to build up a sense of respect. So we have respect for all of these people, all of these objects, that will help us keep our precepts, keep ethical conduct. Then the fourth door is delusions, or also called mental afflictions or disturbing emotions, of which there are many. The principal ones: attachment, anger, jealousy, arrogance, and so forth. So these, if we're not careful, if we're not mindful and alert to what's going on in our mind, these can arise and proliferate, grow, and our mind can start going in that direction of more attachment, more anger, and so forth. And this can lead to transgressing precepts. It can also lead to disrobing altogether. I've known so many people. I've been ordained now 45 years, and just so many people who got ordained and then disrobed. Sometimes even after just a couple of months. It's really like kind of astonishing. Like, did they really know what they were doing? But sometimes even after years, 20 years. Some people who've been ordained 20 years and seem to be really good monks, really good nuns, and then they disrobe. Wow. So I feel like I'm one of the few who kept going, didn't disrobe. And not that, I mean, I try not to feel proud and arrogant about that, but just, again, thankful that I've had the conditions, outer conditions and also inner conditions, to be able to keep going and not give up. And I think not in every case, but in many cases, the cause for people disrobing, giving back their vows, is afflictive emotions that came up in their mind and were not taken care of and led them to... I don't mean to be critical, but I think this is just realistically, this is one of the causes. So we do need to be careful, watch our mind, watch out for the afflictive emotions, and then if we notice them, there are lots of antidotes. Teachings are full of antidotes to the disturbing emotions, and I'm sure you're very familiar with that here. Venerable Children talks about this a lot, especially anger. There's a whole book, a whole book about anger and how to deal with anger, working with anger. So this is a whole subject in itself, working with disturbing emotions. But with regard to this, I want to share something else from the same text, the Lamrim Chenmo, Lamrim Tsongkhapa, called 6 Factors That Give Rise to Delusions. When I encountered this, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is great information. These are like 6 causes, conditions that lead to disturbing emotions arising in our mind. And if we can be aware of these, there are things we can do about them, ways we can work on them. And that can reduce the likelihood of delusions coming up in our mind, or even if they do come up, at least they don't get too strong and out of control. So this is in the Lamrim Chenmo, and there's also a teaching given by Lama Yeshe on these, and it was a book called Wisdom Energy. I think it's still available. Wisdom Energy. It was one of the first Dharma books way back in the early 70s, I think, and it's been republished a few times. But you can also find this article on Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. Very nice teaching. So I thought I'll just go through these, and there should be some time afterwards for questions. Okay, so the first of the 6 factors is the basis. And this refers to seeds or imprints on our mind stream left there by previous experiences of that delusion, that disturbing emotion. So we might sometimes find ourselves feeling angry and kind of surprised, like, where did this come from? I don't want to feel this way. Yeah? Or attachment or jealousy or whatever. You know, just suddenly it's there in your mind. And I mean, many people who haven't studied Buddhism or not knowledgeable about Buddhism, they may sometimes think it comes from outside, it comes from other people. Somebody else put that there, or some spirit. In Asia, people often blame spirits. Spirits, they made me feel this way. They put that in there in my mind. It's not me. Or the devil. The devil made me feel that way. I don't know. So some people may think that way. But according to Buddhism, this disturbing emotion didn't come from somebody else. It didn't come from outside. It came from inside. We have within our mind, because remember, our mind has been there forever. It's beginningless. And it's always been in a state of ignorance and afflicted with delusions. It's never been pure. It's never been free of delusions. So we've had countless lives. I mean, really, that's like, there's no number how many lives we've had, how much time we've lived. There's no measuring that. It's just, inconceivable amount of time that our mind has been existing in this state of being afflicted, getting angry, having attachment, having ignorance, having jealousy, having all these disturbing emotions. And I heard Geshe Zopa explain this once, and I found it really helpful. When a disturbing emotion arises, one of the effects is that it leaves seeds or imprints in the mind, which lay there in the mind until the right causes and conditions come to ripen this seed, so that it pops up and that emotion comes up. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's a really good reason to work on disturbing emotions and not let yourself, act. We can't always have control over what comes up in our mind, but if disturbing emotions do come up in our mind, to at least try not to let them stay too long, because they do have that effect. I think of it like in nature. When a tree or a plant grows, one of the results of that tree or plant is to leave seeds every year. Some of these plants send out seeds. Some they drop on the ground, or they fly away in the wind, or they're carried away by birds. And then they go off and make new trees, new plants. So it's kind of similar to what happens in our mind. If I get angry today, it leaves seeds there in the mind that can give rise to further experiences of that same emotion later on. And if I think, wow, do I want to get angry again and again and again and again? No. So I really want to make sure I work on this. So what we can do, solution, it's only when we gain the direct realization of emptiness that we can completely wipe out the disturbing emotions and all their seeds and latencies, all these factors within us that cause disturbing emotions to arise. Until that time, they're still going to be there. They're still going to pop up. But there are things we can do to try to prevent them from arising in the first place. For example, like really trying to live a life dedicated to ethics, to kindness, to non-harmfulness, to helping others, keeping precepts and so on. So the way that residents here in the Abbey live, or guests when you come and stay here, is this kind of lifestyle. it doesn't mean that emotions will never pop up in the mind. They will, of course. But compared to outside, compared to living in Seattle or New York or Paris or whatever, a normal worldly environment, you probably have fewer instances of these disturbing emotions coming up. And even if they do come up, the environment is very conducive for working on them. You're doing so much practice every day, and you have the good example around you of people who are also trying to, work on their minds, subdue their minds, and you can talk to them if you need help and so on. So there's many factors here that help to keep the disturbing emotions from arising in the first place. And then if they do arise, there are things we can do, remedies, applying antidotes, different kinds of practices, purification practice, and so on. So these are some things we can do to try to at least keep our mind subdued so that the disturbing emotions aren't coming up so much. And then, of course, creating the causes to eventually realize emptiness, studying emptiness, thinking about emptiness, meditating on emptiness, trying to get a realization of emptiness, because that is the thing that will completely eliminate the disturbing emotions. Not all at once, but in layers over time. Okay, the second is the object. So whenever we have a disturbing emotion, delusion, there's always an object. It doesn't just arise for no reason or, no object there. So there's always an object. The object could be a person or another living being. It could be a material object. It could be even just an idea, just something in our mind, a memory, remembering something or fantasizing something. So you probably notice that on your meditation cushion. Sometimes something will pop up in the mind and your mind can get all caught up in attachment or in anger or jealousy. There's no real object right there in front of you causing that disturbing emotion to arise. It's just coming up in your mind. So, solution, if there is an object that you think might trigger a delusion, try to avoid it if possible. So, this is one of the reasons for trying to stay in a more conducive environment or conducive lifestyle. We try to avoid objects that could trigger disturbing emotions. It's similar like people who have had a problem with alcohol or drugs, involved in substance abuse, and then they decide to change, to stop that. So it's best if they just avoid places and situations where people are drinking or using those substances, because if they're around those people, then it's very easy for those old desires, attachments to be triggered off, and they find themselves back into that old habit. Okay, so if we become aware that there are certain objects, people or other kinds of objects that tend to trigger our anger or our attachment or our whatever your most common delusion is, then it's best to try to avoid that object, if possible. It's not always possible because sometimes they're family members or, or people around you right here in the Abbey trigger off your anger or whatever. But you can still try to not spend too much time with them. And if you do happen to be around that person or that object, be super mindful, super aware of that danger. It's happened before, so be really careful to try to not let it happen again. So like with family or old friends or whatever, that we can't just cut off a relationship with them. That wouldn't be compassionate, that wouldn't be appropriate. But if we do spend time with them or talk to them on the phone, do it in a limited way. Just a certain amount of time before before you lose your ability to keep your mind calm, and then the delusion can arise. And the third is society, although that's kind of a funny word. It's more like the people we associate with, the people we spend time with. So it could be family or friends or co-workers if you're in a working situation. So we are easily influenced by other people, and especially if there are people who have bad habits, meaning doing things that we want to avoid doing, that we want to stop doing, like drinking or smoking or swearing or things that are non-virtuous, things that are contrary to our precepts. So if we spend time with those people, then it's very easy that the way they're behaving, what they're doing, could influence us, and we might find ourselves inclined to do the same, and even doing it. So they often talk in the teachings about bad friends, which sounds a little extreme, but it just means those who have habits, habitual tendencies and behaviors that would take us in a different direction, away from going towards virtue, liberation, enlightenment, more compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth. So the path that we want to follow in Buddhism. So certain people, they're going down a different path. And if we spend too much time with them, we might easily find ourselves going down that path as well, behaving in those ways as well. So the solution to this is to just be really careful about who we associate with, who we spend time with. Try to reduce contact with people who have a negative influence on you, especially in the beginning when we're still kind of shaky in our practice, like little kids, who are just still learning how to walk and need help. So in the beginning of our practice, we have to be particularly careful about that. Later, if and when we get stronger in our practice, and even if we are with people who, have these unwholesome habits, we won't be affected by them. We won't feel the slightest tendency to imitate them, to behave that way ourselves. And so try to cut down involvement with those people, and instead spend more time with like virtuous friends, spiritual friends, people who have the kind of qualities that we want to develop, who are behaving in ways that we want to emulate. So that's probably pretty obvious, and that's also part of refuge. When we take refuge, it's a very important part, is to try to keep the distance, not too close to people who would take us away from our practice, and spend more time with people who have a good influence on us. Fourth is, I think the traditional term is explanations, but it means any source of information. Back in the old days in Tibet and India and so on, they didn't have internet and TV and all of these things. But there were teachers, like people who would go around and teach, and sometimes the teachings that they would give would be contrary to the Buddhist teachings, and they might, again, kind of lead people down in other directions. So that was the main source of information in the old days. But now we have so many sources of information: books, newspapers, magazines, the internet, social media, TV, movies, also conversations with people, and again, listening to teachings. So, on the internet, there's all kinds of information there. Even if you want to learn about meditation, you want to learn about Buddhism, you just type it in and you'll get thousands of places where you can go. And there's, I don't know how much control there is on what goes on the internet, but some of that information could be quite misleading. Even if it says Buddhism, even if it says, I don't know what, has a good name to it, a good title to it, but it still could be misinformation. So we need to be very careful, because some of these sources of information might, again, trigger off disturbing emotions in our mind. Anger, attachment, greed, jealousy, and so on. And increase our ignorance, increase our wrong views, mistaken views about things. So, so this is another factor that can give rise to delusions. We have a seed there in our mind. We can't blame these sources of information. It's not their fault. But if we have the seed of anger, the seed of attachment in our mind, then these, this information coming in is like water for those seeds, watering those seeds so that the disturbing emotions arise. So what we can do about this is to be careful about the sources of information that we pay attention to. Really try to avoid those that increase our disturbing emotions, and try to find sources that increase the opposite states of mind, help you have more compassion, more loving kindness, more gratitude, more wisdom, and so forth. And also be very mindful, because even if we pay attention to more positive sources of information, we might overdo it. Spend more time doing that than meditating or other things that we should be doing. Then the fifth is called habituation. It could also be called familiarity. The meaning of that is the more we do something, the easier it becomes. So if we habituate ourselves to anger, or to attachment, or to jealousy, or whatever kind of disturbing thought or emotion, if it happens again and again and again, and we don't try to deal with it, we don't try to manage it, then it becomes easier and easier for those emotions to arise. It becomes like a habit. So that's something we can see in our own experience, I think. I remember in the past I used to be extremely critical. My mind still, does that, but it was almost like my default mode. Constantly seeing faults in everybody, in myself as well, but just finding fault in people and the world, and just seeing the negative things, and very difficult to see positive things. So that was a real strong habit that I have, and very miserable, very negative. It doesn't do any good at all. Makes me unhappy, makes other people unhappy. So it was really helpful to start learning Buddhism and learn more positive ways of thinking, more positive ways of looking at people, and so on. So I can see definitely improvement there. Now I'm able to see more positive things, more good things in everybody, and not so critical as I used to be. So again, with mindfulness, alertness, if we watch our mind, become aware of the disturbing emotions that arise most frequently, habitually in our mind, then we can train ourselves in new ways of dealing with things, new ways of thinking. And in, what's it called? Brain science, I guess. They talk about it in terms of neural pathways. So it's a similar idea. Not that I understand much about the brain, but it's, they say if we keep doing the same thing again and again, we actually create new neural pathways. So we can change the old ones and create new ones. It's definitely possible. The brain is plastic, not frozen and fixed. So again, there's so many wonderful methods in the teachings for how to do this. Train our minds in more positive ways of thinking and defamiliarize ourselves with the negative ones. So the last one, number 6, is attention. It could also be called obsessive thinking. So this is when there's an object of delusion, an object of anger, or object of attachment, or whatever, and our mind, usually just on its own, it's not that, I don't think we do this deliberately, intentionally, but it just gets into this habit of thinking again and again and again about that object and exaggerating it. So if it's an object of attachment that we find attractive, interesting in some way, then we exaggerate the good qualities of it. And we may even superimpose or project things that aren't even there, but will want to be there. So we kind of imagine the object to be much more wonderful and fantastic and beautiful than it really is. And that just increases the attachment. In the case of attachment, it's like it's adding fuel to that fire, to that energy. So the attachment gets stronger and stronger. And in the case of anger, if it's an object, a person, or an object that we dislike, that we find annoying, irritating, then we exaggerate it in the other way. We add more negative things than are really there, exaggerate the negative ones that are there, overlook anything positive or good about the object. So we create, it's like we create an image of the object to be like 100% bad, 100% negative. And you probably heard what the Dalai Lama has said many times, that he met this American, I think he's a psychologist, Aaron Beck, and one of his focuses of his research was on anger and hatred, and the psychologist said to the Dalai Lama that when we are angry at someone or we hate somebody, we see them as 100% bad, 90% of that is our own projection. And His Holiness said he was really delighted to hear that, because he said, that's what Nagarjuna says too. So both Buddhism and science came to the same point. So there's a lot of this going on in our mind. And it's, like I say, I don't think we do it deliberately, consciously, by choice. It's just the way the mind works. It's spinning stories, making the object more good or more bad than it really is. The third point there, the third bullet point, solution. If we notice this happening, it's good to calm the mind down. For example, using meditation on the breath or mantra. You can recite some more Muni mantras for Sravasti, Abbey, or whatever your favorite mantra is. So do some kind of practice, lots of practices to calm the mind down, focus the mind on something more positive, more beneficial than this negative spin in the mind. So calm down the mind, and then apply antidotes. Lots of antidotes to attachment, to anger, and so forth. So, for example, if you're angry at somebody and exaggerating the negative qualities of that person, then it's very helpful to focus on positive qualities. Everybody has some positive qualities. Everybody does some good things. Nobody's 100% bad. So deliberately bring to mind good things about that person. And if you do that sincerely, you can really see it changes your mind. It's almost like it pulls the rug out from under this anger and hatred and negative thinking. Oh, so yeah, that was the end. So that's a lot of information there. I'm happy to share this with anybody.
So you mentioned there were inner and outer conditions that helped you not give up where so many gave up. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you feel those inner conditions have been most supportive to you to keep you in your vows.
I think it must be karma. Karma from the past. I do think I was probably a nun in the past. Some things just came kind of easily and naturally to me. And maybe some stubbornness too. I have this sort of stubbornness, which, I mean, stubbornness can be a negative quality if you use it in a negative way, but it can also be positive. So I noticed with myself that when I set out to do something, one time I was in San Francisco, for example, and I was staying in a house, and I love going for walks. So I looked out, and there was a hill, kind of in the middle of the city. And I thought, oh, I'd really like to go up there and have a great view of the whole city. So I started walking. I thought, it didn't look that far, but it was going on and on and on and on, and I was getting really exhausted. But I just had this sense that, no, I'm going to get there to the top of that hill, and I'm not going to give up. So maybe that's part of it as well. Like, I took these vows. I promised that I'm going to keep them for the rest of my life. I am not going to give them up. So it's not, I do. It's not that I, don't see any benefit or value. Of course I do. I have great respect for His Holiness and Rinpoche, or my teachers who themselves are, keeping the vows. And I really feel it is a good way of living. And I don't think I would be happy doing anything else. When I kind of imagine myself not being a nun, what would I do? Would I be happy? I don't think so. So those are just some of the things that have helped me. And then the teachings on how, the causes and conditions we need to create to reach enlightenment. I do want to reach enlightenment. I don't want to give up. I made it to the top of that hill in San Francisco, and I want to make it to the top of this path too. And I don't want to give up. And ethics is one of the most important practices that we need to do that. So it kind of feels like if I give up this, if I give up, the ordained life, and still say, yeah, I want to reach enlightenment, somehow it's almost like a contradiction. I don't know. Those are just some of the things that come to my mind. Inner conditions.
For the 6 factors, when I think through situations where I have these really strong delusions arise, it feels like many of these are clearly at play. So not just, an object, but there's the familiarity and the object. And so in terms of applying the solution then, is it you try to identify which of these 6 and apply all of the solutions, or is there usually one factor that's kind of dominant?
Well, one of my teachers was talking about these and said that some of them we can't do a whole lot about. For example, the existence of the seeds in our mind. We can't just get rid of those. And they're going to be there for a while. And then with the object, we can try to avoid objects that trigger off our disturbing emotions, but not completely, even in a place like this, which is pretty conducive for spiritual practice. There's still objects there that can trigger off here. So it's hard to totally avoid that one. Information we can work on, society, friends we can work on, and this one, and also habituation. But he said this is one of the things we can definitely work on by watching our mind, paying attention to what our mind is doing. And if we notice our mind is obsessing, thinking again and again and again, like a rat running around the little wheel of, the same things, and it's just increasing our anger, our frustration, our attachment, whatever, trying to get out of that somehow. And I mean, it may not be possible to totally transform the mind at that moment into something positive, but focus on something else for a while. I remember when listening to a talk by a teacher who teaches meditation retreats, and this was in Australia, and they were using a facility that belonged to the Catholic Church. And so they were renting that facility and having retreats in there. And one woman who frequently came to these retreats was really bothered by the crucifix on the wall, because she'd had some bad experiences as a child, with Catholic nuns or Catholic school or whatever. And so he would try to say to her, just don't look at it, just ignore it. But it was really hard for her to do that. Her mind just kept, focusing on them. There's so many other things that she could have looked at and thought about and focused on, but it's like the mind wants to go to that. I mean, I would say the solution there is to look at that, deal with that. Deal with your stuff, because simply trying to avoid it, to push it aside, deny it, that may not help. But, I mean, good to look at that issue there and try to deal with that issue. But anyway, sometimes there are things like that we can do, just don't keep looking at that thing or thinking about that thing, or, like being stuck to it. It's almost like Velcro, I just get stuck to that thing. And, do something else, go for a walk, it's really helpful to just go in the woods, go for a walk, and look at the sky, and kind of clear your mind. So try to find ways of avoiding, or at least stopping, this way of thinking, this obsessive Velcro rat race kind of thinking.
And the mental factors, I think the mindfulness and introspective awareness to help us not lose our ethical conduct. Introspective awareness is not one of the 51 mental factors, but
No.
It seems so important. I was
Don't
trying to
ask
think.
me. I didn't make up that list. I think they say it's a kind of wisdom, intelligence, sharam. It sort of fits in there. But why it doesn't get its own listing, I don't know. I've never heard any explanation of that. But they do say, that list isn't exhaustive. It doesn't include all mental factors, but still, it is an important mental factor. It is necessary to keep precepts. It's necessary to attain calm abiding. So it's definitely a very important mental factor. So I don't know why it's not on the list. Okay, but still, you'd think it would be there. They have non-conscientiousness, and they have conscientiousness. They have non-faith, and they have faith. So there's a lot of opposites: non-attachment and attachment. So if there's non-introspection, it would seem there should also be introspection.
Nowadays, there are some trainings for people who are strong in emotions and tend to suppress them. So these trainings focus on getting the emotion out, and I've tried it and it works. I mean, an emotion takes 90 seconds at the most. So what do you think about it? Just to let the emotion out, because it just goes.
You mean it comes up?
It comes up.
It
and
lasts 90 seconds at the most, and then it's gone. Wow. That sounds pretty efficient. But it doesn't mean that emotion will never come back. I mean, according to Buddhism, you might get angry, and the anger might last a short time and then disappear, but that doesn't mean you're never going to get angry again. It'll still arise again. This is more like stored emotions from past incidents.
Possibly. I don't know. It's just that sometimes strong emotions come up and they teach you this technique to use, and then in 90 seconds it's over. So to me it looks like similar to, well, not similar to, but one solution would be to calm the mind through meditation and then apply the antidotes, but we could also have the emotion come out and then apply antidotes, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know about this method or where it comes from or if it's useful or not. But yeah, it's kind of a controversial topic. I've heard different answers or different interpretations by Buddhist teachers. Some more orthodox will say, oh, you shouldn't allow it to come up, because even if it comes up just for a short time, it's leaving imprints on the mind, and that's a negative thing. So you should really try to keep the mind subdued and not allow the emotions to come up. But on the other hand, another point of view is if you don't allow the emotion to come up, then you may be suppressing it, and it's still there, and it can be in the body as well. I don't know much about this, but they do say sometimes past old painful emotions could be stored in the body. And then it can lead to sickness, it can lead to physical problems, and it can even lead to mental problems. So if you're suppressing, pushing it down, not allowing yourself to experience it, that might not be helpful either. So I usually think a middle way is kind of a middle way between letting it up and acting it out is one extreme, and then suppressing is the other extreme. So middle way would be to allow the emotion to come up in your mind so that you notice it, you're aware of it, you're acknowledging it, not denying it, suppressing it. But then you're not allowing it to be acted out in some kind of negative or harmful way. So, I mean, it does sound like this method is just letting it out without acting it out, without doing anything harmful or anything
Exactly.
negative, anything non-virtuous, breaking precepts and so on. Just like the energy coming and going. So if that's what's happening, that's okay. Because another thing is, I heard in the past, I don't know much about psychology, but for a period of time, psychologists were often encouraging patients to let out their anger if they had old anger towards parents or whatever. To avoid suppressing it, they were encouraged to let it out, act it out, beat a pillow, scream, not hurt anyone else, but just to let that emotion out. And but then I heard that what they found was this actually, instead of decreasing the emotion, increased it, because then it becomes a habit, becomes more habitual.
Venerable has mentioned that as well, either, racing around Bodhisattva loop because you're really, really upset, or pounding on something, or screaming out in the middle of the woods. She says you're not harming anybody, but you're still placing the imprint of being, pissed off and angry. You're still putting that into your mind. The object is not there, but the emotion is still being expressed, and it is placing an imprint. I'm pretty clear. I remember her saying something about that. That doesn't solve the more core issue of how to antidote an affliction such as being really, really angry.
So maybe you can test that method and see if this emotion coming up and going in a short period of time, if it actually increases the incidence, the number of times of this emotion coming up, or if it actually decreases it. To try that out, test that out. Because I did hear, this is what psychologists themselves came to, is that people are actually getting more angry. It was becoming a habit rather than decreasing. But sometimes it's the only thing you can do. I mean, the anger is so strong. You can't sit on your cushion and meditate. So it can be helpful to go and do something physical just to let out that energy. But then you still need to come back to your cushion and look at what that was all about. What could I do to change my mind, to change my behavior, to change my way of looking at things? So apply the methods, meditations for dealing with it.
Instead of expressing the emotion like anger, wouldn't it be more useful to express what is behind? So the needs, sometimes that's needs that are not are not met. So that, I think that's what needs to be expressed, but that won't hurt, and that will be useful.
So you're saying to look at what lies beneath or behind this emotion, and what is the need there to be fulfilled. Yeah, that can often be very helpful. Because anger can sometimes arise due to something else. If you don't know where that other thing is, that's not getting taken care of, so the anger keeps coming up. So if you look underneath and you figure out what that is, and then maybe under that there's something else, and under that there's something else. It's like you kind of go deeper and deeper in your mind, and Pamela Children in some of her books talks about this. When you experience some emotion in, like in your meditation, some strong emotion may come up. Stay with it. She said. She says, hold your seat. You might feel like getting up and running away, trying to get away from this painful experience, but she said, just stay there and stay with it and explore it. And you can start with just like, where do I feel it in my body? What texture is it? What color is it? What temperature? Just to get more understanding of that emotion. And then if you keep going deeper and deeper, you can learn some really interesting things. She talks about one experience that she had where I think there was a person in the community that she was living with, and this woman just didn't like her at all and refused to look at her, talk to her, even when they passed in the hallway, just like look the other way, and she couldn't even get her to talk. And she said it was so painful to be living in a community with someone behaving that way. It was just excruciatingly painful. So she said one night, kind of out of desperation, I guess, she just sat all night in the meditation hall and looked at this pain that she was experiencing, and she got really, really deep. She didn't say what it was that she discovered, but she said she got really down to the root of that pain, and it was incredibly healing. So, so sometimes it's hard, I think, very hard, but to, really explore, go deep into that emotion, and you can learn a great deal from it. And then that also gives you the opportunity to have more compassion, because if you explore your own pain, your own painful emotions, you understand those, then when you observe other people having that kind of experience, you're able to connect with them better and have more compassion for them. Yes, there's lots of different ways of working with emotion. But at least try not to act them out in ways that are harmful or non-virtuous or unethical, breaking precepts and so on. So, I see that as the bottom line. And they don't perpetuate them.
I didn't always feel anger. I had gotten suppressed from sometime in my youth, and I was in my 20s, and I became aware of that. I kind of worked it out, but one thing that I learned from Tenzin Kacho, one time she taught she was a nun for
few decades. And she taught a workshop from Ken McLeod's book.
Whose
and
book?
Ken McLeod.
Ken McLeod.
Ken McLeod. I don't know what, anyway, but McLeod or something, whatever. But the main thing is the practice really helped me, and it made me realize there are three. Everything everyone said, I found I have had this experience to be helpful. What people brought up, I found this quite helpful though, because if you were suppressing emotions like anger, and then when you do express it, it just goes straight to rage. You need something in between. And so this practice actually helped me, and I still use this, and I make space in my mind to make sure that I'm allowing myself to feel things so I'm not suppressing them. I've learned how to do that over the years. But this thing in particular was helpful. On the cushion, you would try to do 10 minutes of breathing meditation, 10 minutes of asking yourself what's there, and I usually would do this when something was disturbing my mind, and then 10 minutes of breathing meditation. And of course, my mind wasn't controlled enough that it could really do that. I was kind of all over the board with what I was doing. But what I got out of this that really helped me was this instruction about when you're just asking what's there. Because if you tend to suppress, when I was suppressing anger, when it does come up, it was too strong and it was too overwhelming. And sometimes I find that my emotions, I'm overwhelmed by emotion. Then I realized the way he taught this was so helpful because you had three choices instead of two. One was to suppress, one was to express, but the third was to have awareness. And the instruction that was helpful is that when you were allowing yourself to ask what's there and see what comes up, giving yourself actually the space to feel, which I don't really have trouble with now. I know how to work with that. But then what to do when the emotion gets really strong again, you can watch your mind starting to move real fast and everything's kind of like getting to the expression side of it again, even if you're sitting on the cushion. And he had you bring yourself back to the calming of doing the breathing meditation. And that was really helpful because it trained me to find the third way, which was to be aware of it, but not let it overwhelm me, not to suppress it, not to have it be overwhelming was the internal experience. I found that quite helpful. I still use that as one tool among, a lot of the things that we've learned.
Do you know the name of the book?
I have it written down, but I never read the whole book. I only read the part that I only did that. It was a long workshop, and I just did what she said, and I did it for months. And then I continued it intermittently as I needed it, and I found it helpful.